These are 5 wide receivers that I'm drafting left and right heading into the 2023 fantasy football season. Number 1 is Christian Kirk of the Jacksonville Jaguars. If you guys have followed the channel this offseason, you guys know that I'm a massive fan of Kirk heading into the season. All of the buzz, all of the hype is around Kirk's teammate, Calvin Ridley, at the wide receiver position, which I think makes a lot of sense. The last time we saw Ridley played before his suspension, he was an absolute baller, putting up nearly 1,400 receiving yards and 9 receiving touchdowns. But the reason I give Christian Kirk the edge is A, because he's already had that full season and offseason with Trevor Lawrence. They have already developed a great chemistry, and B, he is just the better draft value overall looking at mock drafts currently. The last mock draft I ran with my community, Calvin Ridley went at the 4.3 while Christian Kirk went at the 5.1. I will gladly take Kirk an entire round later. Plus, Kirk is going to mainly line up out of the slot, so I'm not worried about his target share with the addition of Calvin Ridley to this offense. Plus, a lot of us out here really do think Trevor Lawrence is ready to take a step forward as an elite quarterback in the NFL. He can absolutely support both Calvin Ridley and Christian Kirk. Like I said, Kirk is the better value overall. I am drafting him all over the place, and I think you should as well as we approach the 2023 fantasy football season. Next up is Brandon Aiyuk of the San Francisco 49ers, finished as your wide receiver 15 in full PPR last year with just over 1,000 receiving yards and 8 receiving touchdowns off of 78 receptions. I honestly think when we're looking at fantasy drafts right now, Brandon Aiyuk is the wide receiver for the San Francisco 49ers that I would rather draft in comparison to Deebo Samuel. And I really don't have anything against Deebo as a whole, but I just think that Aiyuk is being so incredibly undervalued going into the year. Aiyuk gave us 11 double-digit fantasy performances in full PPR last year, and overall just seemed to be so much more efficient than Deebo. And a lot of that boiled down to injuries, don't get me wrong. But I think overall, when we look at Aiyuk and his progression as a player, going from 748 receiving yards to 826 in his second year, and then from 826 to just over 1,000 in his junior year, I really think that Aiyuk could be primed for a breakout year. And like I said, he's just an incredible value on one of the best offenses, one of the most unique offenses in the league. I want him on my teams. I think you should want him as well as we move into the 2023 fantasy football season. All right, let's dive a little bit deeper here. I'm going to go with Allen Lazard of the New York Jets. Yes, I know all the hype is surrounding Garrett Wilson. That is for a good reason. Go out and draft Garrett Wilson left and right as well. But I feel like a lot of fantasy managers are down on Allen Lazard moving into the coming season. And I'm not, especially in full PPR scoring formats. Listen, Lazard is coming from the Packers with Aaron Rodgers, both to the New York Jets. This is going to be Rodgers' security blanket throughout the year. He's going to get those quick dump-off passes. He's going to be that easy look for Rodgers, who already has the chemistry from several years playing with Aaron Rodgers. This is the safety blanket for Aaron Rodgers. I really just can't believe in full PPR scoring formats that we are not giving Allen Lazard more of a chance overall. When we look at last year, 60 receptions, 788 receiving yards, and 6 touchdowns. I know, not amazing, but not bad numbers by any means. When we look at the beginning of the year, he did score 4 touchdowns through his first 6 games. Even larger, he scored 5 touchdowns through the first 9 games of the season. Overall, right, Christian Watson took over the second half of the year, but Allen Lazard was still a big part of some of the only good aspects of the Packers offense last year. He 110% has Aaron Rodgers' trust. I'm not expecting massive numbers out of Allen Lazard by any means, but I think he will be a very good flex option and should be taken more seriously in full PPR formats. Plus, he is going at a very cheap price on average, somewhere between the 8th and 9th round in mock drafts right now. I think he is a wide receiver who we should be taking for our bench and flex spots left and right as we approach the 2023 fantasy football season. All right, last but not least, I've got Elijah Moore of the Cleveland Browns. Listen, there's going to be a lot of receiving options for Deshaun Watson and this Browns offense as we approach the season. But at the end of the day, I think Amari Cooper is going to be the kind of that number one target alpha guy. He's going to get the red zone looks for a majority of the season. And Donovan Peoples-Jones, I think, is going to have a pretty decent year. He really built a nice chemistry with Watson last year and overall looked pretty good at the end of the day last year, but he's more of kind of the stretch the field guy. I think Elijah Moore will kind of be, what we just talked about with Alan Lazard, a security blanket for Deshaun Watson, that underneath guy. I know you could argue David Njoku could play that role as well, but I just like Elijah Moore. Plus, he's just so dynamic. I know last year was a huge disappointment, but when you look at that rookie season, 538 receiving yards off of 43 receptions, 5 total touchdowns, 12.5 yards per catch. When we go back to last year, yeah, it wasn't pretty from a fantasy perspective. Really wasn't pretty overall at the end of the day, but 446 receiving yards, 37 receptions, 1 receiving touchdown, but still over 12 yards per catch. A very dynamic player, quick cut, agile player. I think he's going to just bring a fresh breath of air to this offense, kind of what this offense needed when we look at how they performed last year with Watson at the helm. Listen, this offense is going to be much more polished this year with a full offseason under Watson's belt. I think Elijah Moore is going to be a big part of it. And when we look at his overall fantasy stock right now, the last mock draft I ran with my community, he went at 9.8 overall. I don't think that is a hefty price to invest in a possible wide receiver too. Like I said, I still think Donovan Peoples-Jones will be very involved, but Elijah Moore, I think, could be a great flex option, a great bench option, especially in full PPR, and is absolutely a player that I am excited about drafting moving into the 2023 season. All right, so those were 4 players who kind of in that mid to late round tier that I'm drafting left and right. Here's one player towards the beginning of your drafts that I am drafting at a ridiculous rate in my dynasty leagues, in my redraft leagues, and in best ball overall. That is going to be Amari Ross St. Brown. Not a lot to talk about here. This is not an exciting take, not a hot take. There are a lot of fantasy managers out there, a lot of content creators out there who are huge on Amari Ross St. Brown, but I just had to mention an earlier guy as well. Just under 1,200 receiving yards last year for St. Brown, 6 receiving touchdowns, 106 receptions. Your wide receiver 7 in full PPR. He did play in 16 total games, missed 1 game. It was a little bit banged up between weeks 5 and 7, right after he missed that week 4 game against Seattle. I really think that Amon Ross St. Brown, like many others, could have a true breakout season and crack the top 5 at the wide receiver position. I just think from a full PPR perspective, he is the closest player that we could see have that Cooper Kupp type of year. I don't know if we'll get those exact numbers, but just when we look at what he does as a wide receiver, and we look at how fantasy is now scored in full PPR for a majority of leagues, Amon Ross St. Brown is the exact blueprint of the type of player that we want to draft. I have a ridiculous amount of shares in Underdog right now of Amon Ross St. Brown, and I have been drafting him left and right, sometimes very early in the first round, sometimes at the 1.8, at the 1.9 in mock drafts with my community. And I know a lot of you guys out there are as well. Like I said, just wanted to mention one early player for today's list. And that'll do it for today's video. If you guys did enjoy the content, hit that subscribe button, hit that like button. Please drop me any comments, questions, or concerns pertaining to the 2023 fantasy football season down below. I'll get back to you as soon as I possibly can. With that, I'll say thank you so much for watching and or listening. And remember, yes, Odd here on the catch.